Good morning, beautiful people of the internet, and welcome once more to our Sunday special live. And you have all four of us. It is once again a full house if we ignore the fact that Ross Harper is still technically part of the group. I don't think anyone can technically ignore Ross, but we will give it a damn good go today. Helen Chorley, the face of Property TV, queen of the spreadsheets, and an absolute fucking legend. You have Adam Lawrence, the bigger, the badder, the sexier Mr. Sager Solihull. There he is in Red Ladies, Temptation at its best. You got Piotr Rusnek, who's got a slightly deeper toned voice today, suffering from a bit of a cold, but god damn does he sound good. And you have me. And we are here to talk through Adam's supplement in terms of cliff notes at the very least.
I don't think there's been enough said about you, Jay.
Yeah.
I think the
I
master
thought I was
of
diverting
linguistic,
quite nicely.
I think the master of linguistic challenges and person who can describe things 10 times better than they really are.
And sexy
the beast from the east.
The beast from the east. I'll take it. Talking about a beast, bloody hell, what an article. That was an absolute stunner.
Bravo.
Yeah, let the juices flow today a little bit, but obviously there's been some interesting bits going on as we continue to unpick the banking crisis, or is it just an excuse to get some pretty naff old banks under the bus who've been making more mistakes than Liz Truss in the past few months? And you know, that's still unfolding as we speak. Base went up 0.25%. We can't ignore that. That's going to pile a ton of pressure on. I'm reminded of a property trader, very prolific property trader friend of mine, who sent me a message when base went up to 4, saying what a day to be a property trader. So I can't imagine Thursday was a bad day for him, as more people just get closer to their threshold of pain and start thinking about waving the white flag. No two ways about it. Inflation, everyone, the whole world surprised by that 10.4% print earlier this week. The whole world, apart from me and a few others who've been talking about it for a couple of years, who are not surprised in the least. And I'm pleased to have called out the office of the bed of roses as early as I did. I should caveat this by saying a couple of very smart friends who are betting on interest rates being particularly low by the end of the year. The reason why I disagree with them is because I think they are underestimating just how hard it will be to get rid of this inflation. And there's been no recession in post-war history that has turned inflation from 10 to sub 2% by the end of the year. And we have to put this into context. 10 in today's world is 18, 20, 25 in the 70s, which is where we were. You know, the difference is we're keeping a lid on the wage increases, but there seems to be, as always confounds me in these situations, some misguided economics that's got through to Westminster. So they're very clearly following a path, and it's a natural Tory path anyway, right? Keep the public sector paid quite poorly, right? But they're following a path of keeping wage rises below inflation, thinking that that will help to fix the problem, which, don't get me wrong, it's better than giving people pay rises above inflation, because the cyclone really does go upwards. But if you're giving people 7 and 9% pay rises, I think the bus drivers negotiated 15 or 16 and they settled, I think I heard yesterday.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many years that's over. And that's another one of my bugbears, that they take these things out of context and they say 16%, then you find out it's over 4 years. And it's not really much of an increase at all, given where inflation's at. But anyway, it doesn't mean that's going to kill inflation off. If people are getting paid 7% more money, especially with due respect to them, in jobs like bus driving, they probably consume around about 100% of any extra wage rise that they'll be lucky enough to get, because they can't afford to buy all the things they want and need to buy anyway in the first place. So things will still spiral upwards. They just won't spiral upwards as dangerously fast. But how we get from 10.4 to 2.8, or, you know, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, these people last month were telling me inflation was going to be 1.8 by the end of the year. Well, prepare me a hat, pass the salt and vinegar, and I will be very happy to consume it live on air, 9 a.m. on the first Sunday special live of 2024, right? It's not happening. It's not happening. And apart from anything else, when we get to April and these minimum wage rises kick in, circa the 10% mark, and these pension benefits and other benefits rises kick in at 10.1%, what do you think the inflation print's going to be in that month? I'll give you a little clue. It's going to be big, right? It's going to be big. So unless it goes on a cliff steeper than something that Eddie the Eagle Edwards has tried to jump down, I cannot see to even 2.8 by the end of the year. Now, my friends who disagree are very sharp. A couple of them worked in the city as traders. They're very, very clever people. I just think my economic history might have the edge over them. And I'm not saying inflation can't fall relatively quickly. And I'm not saying there's not going to be a big mess of an event, whether that's in the financial sector or somewhere else, that is the banana skin that everyone's kind of waiting for. But it remains to be seen. And I don't think this banking crisis is quite what it's being made out to be. There's quite a lot of reasonably understandable explanations as to why what's happened has happened. There's bubbles, or there's sectors that people are overexposed to, or there's dodgy business models. But the massive difference between this and 08 is ultimately that you know exactly how to value what's gone on here, because they're simply bonds that have devalued. Everybody knows they've happened. It's whether it needs to be taken into account in our accounts or not that's really the argument. And then it comes down to faith in the system and belief, because money is religion, right?
What's their thinking about why inflation will be down so low by the end of the year?
Well, they're probably, I wonder if they're also a bit self-interested, because they're also heavily exposed to the property sector and on variable rates. So that needs to be borne in mind. But basically, we're going to see an event that takes us into a deep recession that requires a cut from the central bank. But I still think they're wrong, because even if we see that event, what they're not appreciating is we could easily go into a recession when we're still in a hiking cycle, if that's what needs to happen, because we will still kill inflation first. We will attempt to address the other problems. And I think that's what they're missing. But, you know, Liz Truss could do crazy things within, I mean, they're saying she was in office for 49 days, but she was impotent for the last, you know, couple of dozen of those, I think, realistically. So the damage that can be done in 2 or 3 weeks by the wrong policy and the wrong people is insurmountable. But I'd be stunned if we had a general election this year, unless there's some incredible swing in the polling. It's almost nailed on to be either sort of May, June, or perhaps December 2024, depending on what's going on. So where these major shifts might come from in terrible policy, I don't know, because like him or loathe him, and I don't know if anybody fits into the first camp, even his mother, to be honest, but Jeremy Hunt's doing a reasonably decent job, right? So he's not gonna screw anything up in relatively short order, I don't think. And then after I'd sort of got into all of that and the deals that are starting to come through on the back of it, and the deals that are going to come through over the next few months on the back of it, I also talked through a particularly challenging conversation. It was challenging and entertaining at the same time, really.
I know, it sounded juicy. I would have liked to have heard
that. You'd have, if I'd recorded it, you'd have absolutely loved it. But because it was with someone who doesn't really subscribe to that, you need to know, like, and trust people to do business with them, and it's all about money instead. It was very, very clinical and quite painful, but good pain, not sort of masochistic pain, but good pain that really pushes you around a bit and makes you think about what you're doing and whether you're doing it right. And we had a couple of doozy disagreements in terms of what a property investment company really should be when you're growing it, versus what an institution or a large shareholder would want to see from that company. And I guess I fundamentally, although I know it's an investment company, I still see investment companies having a growth phase and a value phase ultimately, or if you're familiar with the 2x2 matrix with the cash cow, the growing business and the cash cow business and stuff like that. There's a time while you're growing that business before it becomes into the cash cow quadrant, if you like, right? And my non-appointed but self-appointed advisor disagreed with me significantly on that issue. But then we can have disagreements, and we can work out whether we're right or wrong, can't we? I mean, I've made no secret of the fact I've nicked a lot of my business strategy from Warren Buffett, Amazon, Apple, companies like that, by reading into how they've done what they've done. Not that I'm expecting or suggesting I'm going to build $1 billion or certainly $1 trillion company, right? but it doesn't mean you don't use the same tactics they've already tried and tested, because they work, and they've worked incredibly well in those fields. So I guess it depends what you're trying to achieve.
When do we expect your listing?
Well, from the basis that I don't want to be a PLC director, and that much I definitely worked out this week, I'd say about Blur's Day, the 34th of never. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, count me in for 20,000.
There we go. These book building raises are easier than you'd believe, Helen. I tell you, it's easy as that. So that was a bit of a smorgasbord, a bit of a tour around a few different subjects, but we also had a great conversation this week in Bristol about incorporation, because, of course, that's even more at the top of the agenda. And there were, I was on Rod's Rodcast with him doing a sort of news update earlier this week. And yeah, Michael Gove's comments were incredibly positive, really, towards landlords who still suffer from Section 24. Now, of course, Michael Gove is one of the most trustworthy politicians who always has the best policies that get in that. Oh, no. Okay. No, he's not. But nonetheless, very positive words about the tax situation and what it's doing to everything. Now, Richard Bowser put a comment underneath, which was very pragmatic and experienced, as Richard always is, and said, the thing is, it's all well and good about Michael Gove, but when this gets to the Treasury, they have to write off £1 billion worth of tax or whatever they're collecting on Section 24 these days. They'll say, oh, thanks ever so. Where are you getting that £1 billion from then? Or we're taking it away from the landlords, and we're going to get it from, well, let's take it from the bus drivers, shall we? They've had a pay rise. Not going to happen. So that's the notorious way in politics. There's great ideas and there's ideology, but there's not enough incontrovertible proof that it's actually Section 24 truly driving people out of the market, really, for me. And I say that as a landlord who has sympathised deeply with people caught by Section 24, but ultimately was in limited companies since 2012, even though I was told at the time by a high-profile mortgage advisor that I was bloody stupid for doing so, because that's not the way you do it, because we've always done it this way. Now, I was in limited because I wanted to scale, and I didn't see scaling in my personal name as a reasonable option. I saw insurance risks. I saw lots and lots of good reasons to be within the wrapper. And at the time, actually used the deeds of trust to whack properties into the company, but still benefit from the personal mortgage rates. That's before everyone got their knickers in a twist about beneficial interest and all the rest of it in Section 24. But of course, then the rates started to converge, and I just decided before I got of a reasonable size, portfolio-wise, not shoulders-wise, but of a reasonable size, that I would flip to paying the ferryman and just pay the limited company rates, and it would be clean, So there's all sorts of stuff to tuck into there, whether it wants to be I'll go back to that conversation I had, because I've never had someone use as much reverse psychology on me for some time, and it was a neuro-linguistic programming masterclass. But luckily, I have studied some of the snakiest players in this field, as we've discussed before when we've talked about scams, and luckily I was well prepared, but extremely persuasive. It really made me check just quite how strong my mind was, and my own personal opinion was, and my mindset was, and it felt a bit bruised afterwards, but did me a favour. So no pain, no gain, right?
Like an exercise session for your brain and ego, it sounds like.
Yeah, it really was. It really was, because normally I like to think I tried to engage the former and I tried to leave the latter in a little box somewhere, but sometimes you can still, if you prod it hard enough, it still comes out to play, right? It's part of being competitive, I think, Helen. It's probably just the way it is.
So this you mentioned that you started seeing some deals. Like, what do you see in the deals coming in? Like, what are the key highlights of what's coming? Because we started seeing a lot of this. We work with a few cash buying companies, and somehow there's quite a few Scottish leads coming, which don't excite us as much, but they do.
Bloody southern snobs you are. That's your problem.
We don't understand the system there, and that's the key issue. But
nobody understands the system. You don't have to worry about the system.
Damn it, Piotr, stop focusing on these petty details.
Okay. Yeah, but then in terms of like deals in England, like we see that there is the yields are quite a bit higher. Like I've even seen one HSBC with a 5 year left on the lease still selling for like 11.5% recently. And that's like, and there's a lot of other examples of properties where like even 8% or 9% yield isn't that exciting, even like in London.
Well, if it's commercial at the moment and you're not, haven't got an incredible banking relationship, you're going to be paying 7% on your leverage. So I made the point today in the supplement about gearing down and how people just don't really understand the power of leverage. And there's this I got a bit of a bee in my bonnet, as I'm wont to do occasionally, as I'm sure you'll agree, that, there's the concept of, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is an incredibly useful book for breaking your mindset if you have a very fixed, very traditional, very, let's say, employee-driven mindset, right? It's a great book. Also, Robert Kiyosaki is one of the biggest fakes out there on the internet, right? So you have to bear that in mind as well. So it's good for pushing your thinking, but it's not good for telling you all the answers, because good debt versus bad debt, he makes a big deal about the house that you live in, doesn't he, in the book? And he says, right, so he has quite a fixed mindset around that, actually. He tries to convince you that it's a liability. Now, in reality, as always, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. And if you want, require, need, have the means to live in a £5 million house, it might well be a good idea to rent that property, because to buy it, the stamp duty is going to be 300 grand or more, or whatever it's going to be. There's lots and lots of reasons to rent it. You're probably renting it at less than a 1% yield or something ridiculous like that. Well, in that case, it's probably better to do that than sink the money in it. There's people think at the top end that houses just keep accelerating and making money, but there's that property for sale is it in Regent's Park, and it's 250 million.
Yeah.
And actually, quite a lot more than 250 million has been spent on that in order to get it in the condition that it's in terms of purchase price and everything that's been done to it. Now, that alone also obviously will have a stab at what it costs to run that property every year, but presumably it's into seven figures to run the property. One can't have a house like without having a butler, dear boy, apart from anything else. So, before we start on the gardens and the people in waiting, let's be politically correct about the people in waiting these days. So, it's not a golden ticket just having a more and more expensive property. But then, of course, there are non-financial reasons, such as your landlord can't evict you if your kids go to a nice school that's within walking distance because they want to sell it, for example. So there's control points as well around that stuff. And one of the other things that I certainly took away from it was there tends to be this categorization of good debt and bad debt, and it's about types of debt. So things like credit cards bad, whereas the point I made today is 0% 48-month credit card paying for all your building materials on refurbs at the moment is frankly genius. It's not bad at all.
I love that. That was the point that I wrote down. That was my favorite point. It's what's appropriate, and look at it in context.
Yeah, and the flip side of this is if you're buying a commercial property at 6% yield, let's say at the moment, but the financing is at 7%. Now, if you don't use leverage, or you don't need to, or you've got so much money, you're a family office, etc., no problem, right? But it's going to affect the value of them, because a lot of people do use leverage. And if you have to leverage at a rate above your net rent after costs before financing, you're going to put yourself in a negative gearing position, or you're gearing down. So your return on equity, instead of putting it up from 6% to 15% in the example that I used in the supplement today, you might put it down from 6% to 3%. Now, 3% is not an acceptable return on equity. I mean, the HSBC with 5 years left at 11.5% is definitely interesting. I think that's probably people aren't patient enough, and or people just see opportunity, and or no developer realistically is going to wait 5 years to develop that unless they're extremely patient. They're going to find better opportunities. If they've got a ton of money, they might buy it and stick it in the pipeline, but on the face of it, from an investment perspective, it sounds great. But yields, there's a real parallel between yields and what's happened in the banks in the last couple of weeks, because the reality is yields have moved more than the surveyors or the market want to admit, right? Prime Central or London, in a London office, 2.5% yield, right? Discuss. It just can't be right. There's no guarantee of the capital growth in the building going up.
Yeah.
Building's going to deteriorate over time, and there'll be new offices that are bigger, better, more shiny, and all the rest of it. And 2.5% now sits a clear 1.5% below the short-term bond yields, right? Which are guaranteed money, right? The money printers just go on to pay that stuff, even if the government gets in trouble. So that can't be right. Now, the Savills or whoever, not picking on Savills, they all do it. They're all singing off the same hymn sheet because it's a bit of a cartel in these situations. But to move that from 2.5 to 2.75 or 3 is not accurate, I'm afraid. But they know it would cause God's trouble if they moved it to 4.75, right? And yields don't always have to be above bond yield if you're expecting appreciation in capital, or you've got RPI linked or rent review clauses or whatever. But the problem is rent review clauses, upwards only, is fine. But unless they're already stipulated, if they're not linked to inflation or fixed, the rents are going to go down on these buildings. So that argument also defeats itself.
So these kind of like organizations and investors buying, say, offices at 2.5%, why do you think they're buying this? Like, is it just like to keep the money in a kind of trophy asset, or is it for what do you guys see as the reasons for?
So there are reasons why people like Abu Dhabi would buy Berkeley Square, and they're just never going to sell it, right? They're never going to sell it. So at a top level, we've got so much money and we want to allocate it in something, you know, if bonds don't perform properly anymore, then this is the last thing that might perform like bonds, right? Not necessarily commercial property. Used to be retail. It's not retail anymore for sure, but maybe residential property is. So that makes sense. But to be clear, Piotr, what I'm saying is they bought them at 2.5% yield in 2020 or 2021 or 2019. And now those yields have expanded much, much more than the market will care to admit.
This is a bit like buying those football clubs, because like you see someone buying a football club for 250 million, and then 10 years later they're selling it for 750 million, and it's like, what changed?
Well, there's
always like people sell in the time where they can make money, right? Because
I think football economics can be significantly different, because I'm aware of lots of people at the lower end of football clubs who made great money and great percentages on buying clubs in distress. And there's some pretty famous ones, aren't there? I mean, Ken Bates bought Chelsea for £1, didn't he? And he sold it for for several hundred million, although obviously nowadays it's worth several billion. And there's this sort of cash machine at the top level with all the commercial assets that come with it, including flows of income on shirt sales, including this, including that, including the other. And then there's people who've done well at the lower level. There's someone who Helen knows reasonably well, who I won't necessarily name live on air. And I don't know if Helen actually knows the history of all of this, but let's just say a secondary university town in the UK who bought the football club and squeezed it quite hard and maybe did a few things that are a little bit sharp. And that club's actually now owned by Grosvenor Estates, who presumably were fans of the Fenland Polytechnic institution. You know, there was some good money made on deals. That was a sale and lease back, as I understand it, from what I've read about it. So there's definitely there was a guy who bought Oxford United, who were in a stage where they were sinking like a stone in the Football League. So it was kind of counterintuitive, but they had property assets available. They had a new stadium to move to. It was half built. You know, he paid he didn't pay very much money and he took some debt on, but immediately, let's say on day one, he woke up with 8 million quid's worth of debt and 12 million quid's worth of assets. So it's a head start. It's 33% BMV, right? And then when he sold it, he realized more than his 4 million, because he added value. He created a complex with a bowling alley and a cinema and a this, that, and the other, which was a commercial property asset around it. So, you know, I know these days they look at the big footballers as sort of I mean, is it a great tactic these days to try and buy some footballers nearing the end of their career who are massive names, on the basis that when they're finished with you might be able to flog them to a Saudi or Qatari club for 4 times what they're worth? Maybe it is, you know, flipping players might be a good. So football economics is utterly fascinating. And there are definitely people who do their plums in this department, but there's also some very sharp people who've made a lot of money. But I think it's like any business. Everybody, 99% of the people are going to focus on the 11 people on the pitch kicking the ball around, right? Trying to beat the other 11 people on the pitch. Whereas really, it's just balance sheets, flows of income, probability of getting planning permission, and all of those other things that come into. And a lot of these deals that are good are, I mean, look at Spurs Stadium, look at Chelsea's Village, look at all of those. They're all property plays, right?
I like those parallels between like football and property, because there's so much going on. And
I don't know. I don't know, Pio. I think flipping football players is dangerous. These guys fall over a blade of grass.
You just don't
like
football.
I mean? Like,
if we applied this parallel to chess or pool, like, you would love it. Okay, like, look at your face. Like, your face is smiling.
I was making a joke about how easy it is for footballers to take a dive, and flipping one of them would be quite dangerous, because halfway through a flip, they may just trip and fall.
It's just like a commercial tenant who wants to surrender a lease. You know, the same thing.
Or enter a CVA.
There's also a fair amount of risk management to do around their extracurricular activities, but let's not disparage the poor gentleman. So I wonder if Hiscox do insurance against that sort of stuff. Actually, I'm sure they probably do. But the premium are probably quite interesting. You know what I mean? So. Although perhaps the problem starts with Hiscox, but that's perhaps slightly. Time for me to lower the tone today rather than wait for jail.
Yes, don't put it all on my shoulders.
Brilliant.
Well, look, there's opportunity. I mean, for instance, we're having a conversation, on the Lord's Day today with somebody who very easily recognises that there is a greater degree of distress about to enter the market, and since we operate in distress, it explains my lack of hair. Since we operate in distress, they want to have a chat. So there's definitely things out there. I mean, I'm still waiting to see the fallout from mid 2020 to early 2022 with the prices that properties were selling for. I'm a big fan of trying to put my finger on what's actually inflationary in this market. Not what is now the symptom of inflation. What kicked it off? Because 10-0, it wasn't the fucking banks this time round. The banks weren't the issue. What was the issue? Was the issue energy? Was it petrol? Was it inflated house prices because people were making money doing side hustles or leaving jobs and starting their own businesses? Or what was it? Because it's one of those pricks.
I call Milton Friedman to the stand, Your Honour. I call Milton Friedman. He'll tell you.
It's one of these things, like like you say in your article, I loved it, is that you can't waste a good opportunity to exploit a crisis. You can't waste a good opportunity to exploit a war. Just an FYI, that seems to be kicking off in the background.
It's the strap line of the 2020s, mate. You're so right. It's happening left. Even the Swiss National Bank are at it. These people are supposed to be beyond reproach. All right, they may have housed some questionable money in their time. There's no doubt about that. But they are.
They mentioned that online once and got a little bit.
They are. I'm not going to go full Lineker, don't worry. But they are the bastions of the sector, right? They are respected globally for their financial prudence, which is why so much they've been waiting to take Credit Suisse down and teach them a bit of a lesson.
Yeah, but they don't do this to redress. In banking, it's not about redressing balance. Bankers don't do balance. They care about balance.
They care about balance sheets, but generally fixing them rather than them being actually made.
They care about completely unbalanced balance sheets. The heavier stacked in their favour, the better the balance is, right? That's a balance.
Do you know what made me laugh this week, Helen, that I think it will resonate with you? We're all moaning about the fact that these banks are allowed to hold these bonds to maturity and therefore they're not reflected in their balance sheets. But if you remember, the last serious crisis before 2008 that springs to my mind was Enron. And of course, the problem with Enron was they valued things on a mark-to-market basis. So they valued things in real time, then they paid bonuses, and then the market moved against them, and all this money was lost. And then there was a little cooking of the books, as was required to get through several cooking of the books, and then out for a steak dinner and 700 whiskies, and the auditors sort of turned a blind eye or whatever. So you're not allowed to mark-to-market, but also you're not allowed to hold to maturity. Well, what the bloody hell do you want in that case? You know, and no one can moan about it. You know, ultimately the central banks have raised rates so aggressively. We've got two extremely good economists who've got no political skin in the game, almost the non-execs of the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee, right? And since we hit 3%, they've been saying no more, right? Now, partially, someone asked me a great question at Bristol on Friday, and they said, well, the thing is this, does raising rates really do that much? And, you know, and ultimately the answer is no. There's a couple of million people who drop off fixed rate mortgages this year, go on to floating, and it'll double their interest payment, which won't double their mortgage payment because they're resi and they're repayment mortgages, right? So it's not as painful as it sounds, but it'll take 250 to 300 quid a month out the pocket of 2 or 3 million households, right? Now, that's significant because that's the average mortgage payment's about £1,000, you know, so that's what I'm basing that on. So that's significant, but it's not as significant as a 10.1% pay rise to several million people that also has an uplifting characteristic throughout the whole of the private and public sectors, because some of the poor buggers in the public sector are now getting paid nearly minimum wage because austerity slapped them so hard over the last 12 or 13 years. So it's sort of the seesaw of the balance. You know, there's several ways. People say, how do you end this? And you only end it with a recession, right? Or a soft landing. Ha, ha, ha. I mean, that's a bloody pie in the sky. There's a couple of pigs flying past the window as I discuss the soft landing. You know what I mean? You end it with fiscal policy, which is putting tax up. Now, can it go up any more? Not under this administration. If Labour get in, I'm sure it will go up some more. And I'm sure Rishi's tax return, which was beautifully slid out, wasn't it, while Boris was in front of that hearing committee. But the fact Rishi paid 22.4%, and listen, let me make my feelings very bloody clear on this. I think we should be bloody grateful that the man can be bothered to be Prime Minister, because I sure as hell wouldn't do it myself. And he's got way more bloody ability than I've got. So he pays more in tax and he gets paid for being the PM, for Christ's sake. But don't expect him to put capital gains up to the income tax rate, right? Whereas Labour may well do that, because that is a piece of low-hanging fruit that there really is no excuse for, painful though that will be. But then imagine how many opportunities that will create, ladies and gents, because if CGT was to go from 20 on shares to 40 or 45, there's going to be a few people cashing in on that puppy. And then you'll see some transactions which will be really, really interesting. But yeah, I'm not surprised to see people are lining up the ducks to speak to distressed experts such as yourselves, Mr. Howard. And I think they're dead right. We talked for the first time probably in early 2021 about the impending increase in asset management activity and the likes, and that can has probably been kicked as far as it's going to be kicked down the road, because there's not really any room to really do too much about it. There is theoretical money in the government coffers if we keep stealing money from the future as far out as 2028. There's theoretical money, but there's not enough to come for like a, well, the other problem is things like funding for lending, which was a great idea of a scheme, but wasn't really very successful. The problem is actually getting the money out there. And now the banks have had a taste for, do you know what gets us to lend money? When the government underwrites it, that's what gets us to lend money. And now they've tasted the lightning. You know, will they lend to anything remotely risky other than, I can't see it myself. If you encourage you get the behaviour you encourage, don't you?
Yeah, incentivization. Yep.
How dangerous is it to print a fuck ton of money and just flood the market a little bit
at 10.4 CPI?
Just how dangerous? Just hypothetically, let's say
on a scale of 1 to dangerous, I would say global thermonuclear war. Realistically, 143 out of 10. Let me throw a couple of countries at you: Argentina, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Do you want the United Kingdom in that bracket? You know, you can go from, you know, we're nowhere near hyperinflation yet. Do you know what I mean? These guys have dealt with 50% a month, 10,000% a year. The old you push a pram to the shops and you can't afford the loaf of bread by the time you get there.
Yes, Argentina is really reliable when it comes to hyperinflation.
Oh yeah.
Well, they're also not scared of a default. Do you know what I mean? Their credit rating is the equivalent of you know, the tenant with 19 CCJs. You know.
So now, assume the statement evolves from, instead of printing cash, what if there was a break on some kind of vatable, taxable thing?
Well, the trouble is, it's the wrong way around to deal with things, because fiscal policy needs to be more aggressive at this stage to calm down spending. The only other way to stop this would be for someone extremely influential who could really speak to the people to go on TV and say, listen, what you all need to do is try and save 20% of your income. I know it doesn't feel like you need to right now, but please start saving, because if you do, you are the inflation. You are the inflation, right? So stop spending, and that'll teach the companies they can't keep putting their prices up, because business is too clever in this environment. So everyone will be there going, oh yeah, these terrible input costs going up, whilst their prices are going up 15%. I mean, look at the supermarkets, and look, I'm not having a go at them because they operate on very thin margins in the first place, right? Yeah. But they haven't missed the trick here. They haven't wasted a good crisis. Did it need to go from £1 to £1.50 for most of the stuff in Aldi and Lidl that did that? I would argue that it didn't. That sounds like a nice round number to me. And what does that actually do? It's not 18.2% that hit everybody. It's 50%. That is 50% for the people who can't switch down from Heinz tomato ketchup to, you know, Bramwell's or whatever it's called, because they're already on Bramwell's because they couldn't afford Heinz in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. So they're really screwed. And that is what people are not necessarily appreciating, or accusing Mr. Sunak and Mr. Hunt, who have a reasonably tidy net worth between them, of not necessarily seeing. So there is more help needed at the bottom end. But the problem is, if you help the bottom end, it's also inflationary, because they will spend it all. They will spend it all. So it's a horrible zugzwang of a situation, realistically. But yeah, if you're listening to this, save 20% of your money. We can sort it out. Pass it on to your mates. Tell them all. Stop spending. Stop consuming stuff, people. Stop it.
And then there's a request for you as well.
Okay.
Can you buy the City, please?
That is so funny, Richard.
I can introduce you to a good investor.
I've had a couple of semi-serious conversations about that in seriousness in the past few years, because obviously there's been a need to do that. But the trouble is, the way they've structured the bloody club and the assets and everything else now, it's the reverse of the Oxford United play. There's nothing bloody there to do and buy. It's such a shame. So it needs to go. When it goes into administration, if you'll lend me a couple of quid, Richard, we'll have a go. No problem. Bring back Karen Brady. Maybe not. Maybe not. She might be a little bit
for £1, and that's
exactly.
It.
I'm looking 50p. I'm not going £1. I want to see the new record. The new record, please.
Well, I'm glad we talked a little bit more about inflation. I had a chat with somebody the other day and said, "Oh, why don't they do like the helicopter, like funding? Just print money and throw it around." And I said, I don't think you understand how dangerous that is. But I'm going to raise it with the resident economist on the Sunday chat. So I'm hoping that they've clicked on, because I've shared it onto my Facebook page.
Perhaps if you just Google the Weimar Republic, and I'll leave it there rather than go on a 10-minute rant. I mean,
wheelbarrow ready. Yeah,
and this is, you know,
why don't they make it easier? Like, why don't they do something with like the utilities, like the gas and electric? And I said, well, there's only so much they can poke their nose into that before, and then you will mention the major issues around that, which are plentiful. And
well, you got to, Jay. Just on that subject, it's worth unpacking a couple of things there, right? Number one, the profit that the energy companies made from the domestic market last year was actually very, very poor indeed, right? It's regulated the margin they can charge. They made all their money on trading, and they made all their money on exporting to other countries as well, right? Now, that's not in the press because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Right.
And luckily, they're actually paying a shitload of that back in windfall taxes on top of the extra taxes that they already paid because they provide utilities, which is more than the normal corporation tax in the UK anyway. So that argument, unfortunately, defeats itself. But there's no stupid questions. And this is exactly the sort of thing that Liz Truss did do, but then they didn't ask anybody. Nobody marked the homework. They just said, right, we're charging into this budget, bish, bash, bosh, and then look what happened. And now she's trying to get them in the bleeding House of Lords, which is surely something's going to kick off on that front. But I mean, well,
she didn't show her working out and then decided not to show her answers and just decided to do some stuff. But
wasn't even on a napkin, mate. Wasn't even on a napkin.
No.
A bit of paper.
Joke. But yeah, that would not help proceedings. But yeah, it is counterintuitive to think we need bigger tax and we need to spend less, and that's our way out of it. But either that or
similarly, there were several questions, and I got a little bit tongue-tied at this point because I spent the whole time going, but tries to come out a little bit too quickly. Well, why don't you just increase the taxes on like the 10%, the most wealthy people in the country? I said that won't even make a dent in what you're considering. Like if everyone who earned £1 million a year in this country paid half of it to the charity of your choice, it still wouldn't touch the edges. It wouldn't touch the sides. There's not enough.
It's not disinflationary in any way because when those people get a 250 grand pay rise, they don't spend the money. Generally speaking, it goes into investments, and if they do, they probably spend it offshore, not in the UK. So.
And even worse, when they did that before, and we saw taxes up to 50%, what those people do is leave the country. All the hedge fund managers went off to Switzerland. You know, it's and then you've completely you've made happen exactly the opposite of what you want to happen because now you haven't got their taxes at all. Well done.
And you've got capital outflow as they get paid outside of the country. Yeah, it's not ideal.
And then the other measure of that is they're not actually, forget the taxes, they're not consuming in the market.
Exactly.
Which means that their income isn't filtering down.
Exactly. And they are big spenders, right?
They're big spenders. And that's twice as toxic as them taking their income out of the country in the first instance.
Yeah.
We lose about 1,500 ultra high nets a year on average, just to put that into context at the moment. That's about the outflow because places like Dubai are obviously very attractive. Not thinking of anyone in particular when I say that, of course. But,
Dubai, Malta, you know, you pick your poison.
Portugal, the double taxation treaty. The lack of the double taxation treaty is a beautiful thing, isn't it, though?
British Virgin Islands, you pick your poison. Bermuda,
I prefer Cayman myself. But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
We've got a live price update from Costa. 2 coffees, $8.25.
You got mugged, Mark. Absolutely mugged. Did you take your own reusable cup? Because some of these places knock 25 pence off the bill if you take your own reusable.
They do.
At Costa, you can have a £25 a month membership for unlimited coffees. It must be the cheapest service office you can possibly imagine. You can have up to 5 a day.
Is Costa?
Maybe it is Pret. Sorry, maybe it is Pret. I thought they did it in Costa as well, but yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean,
come from Malta, it's only £2.65, €2.65.
Yeah, coffee.
Come to the Genesis Centre. I'm sure it's less than £2 for a coffee.
Well, drop the address in the comments, Adam. Let's take a little roadie trip.
For coffee, I highly recommend McDonald's double espresso, about 99 pence, or within 20%.
Depends on which country you're in, though, Piotr. I think we figured that out when we were in Dubai. That was not a good coffee for you.
And in Dubai, for some reason, the coffee at McDonald's was different. I was disappointed because it's always really good, and then that was inexpensive.
Maybe it was just the Arabica roast that they do there, homegrown.
I paid that. My coffee in Dubai cost over £6.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, I don't want to talk about this traumatic event.
Right, folks, I'm going to have to love you and leave you, I'm afraid, because I need to get away. But until next week.
Brilliant,
Take it easy.
Yo. Okay, nice. Well, the three of us left. Now we can chat and say a word. No, that was a good chat. I think we've covered quite a bit.
Tell you what shocked me in that statement was I had an inkling that the money that was being made by the energy company wasn't solely for the energy that they were selling here. I had no idea that the majority of it was from intertrading and selling abroad. That's insane because that definitely isn't reported.
No, oh God, no.
That
No.
definitely isn't reported. That is something I'm gonna have a look at after this call because I was almost entirely unaware. There were quite a few things about the profit they made that didn't make sense, and I was like, oh, there's got to be something to that. And that sounds like that's what it is. So just have a little bit of a read up. That's crazy.
But that's very typical. It's unsurprising in a way that if things don't fit the narrative, then they don't get. It's not headlines. It's
whitewashed. Look, this is the profit they've made. Not they made profit from us here, or they did that there, or that just completely white under one large number that makes you sweat.
Yeah, exactly, and shows actually how easily public opinion can be swayed when you don't have the context around stuff, and how many areas have we seen that applied in over the past 3 years. Critical thinking.
Yeah,
that's what we need. More questions.
Yeah. They don't teach that at school, sadly. Not even in a psychology degree. So, yeah, at least they didn't. How many years ago? Too many years ago. 27 years ago.
When you were 5.
Thanks. I've it's a new skin regime that I've been
doing. Brilliant. Well, let's wrap up the chat for this week. We've got another call in a few minutes, which you need to switch to, but chat's been really engaging.
Mark's got another comment there, which is a really good point. Actually, I'm going to share something. I didn't share it. I was saying when Adam mentioned Milton Friedman, there's a good little snippet on Insta. I'll share it in my stories. But yeah, that's exactly this point, Mark.
Yeah, I think I asked a question that kind of pushed Adam to kind of make that very, very clear. Because a lot of people hear these things like, well, if it's just money, they can print more money. Like, no. This is pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. Yeah,
and was inevitable. Like we knew this when they were doing it, but nobody was talking about it then. But yeah, the Milton Friedman clip is really good. Obviously, he's in America, so he talks about he blames Washington. It's Washington. But I'll share that. It's good.
Yeah, you exchange Washington for Parliament for whoever. It fits. It's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Right. Well, on that note, see you all guys
the rest
next
of your Sundays.
Yes, thanks for all the comments and questions.
That was really good. Bye.
Bye-bye.